At least 7 people have died in the Mediterranean Sea, while 7 others were rescued when a boat carrying 27 African nationals sank in southern Tunisia on Sunday. More bodies were found on Monday, and the total number of deaths include 8 women and 3 children. Now, data gathered by the International Organization for Migration shows more than 620 people are feared to have drowned in the Mediterranean this year alone, while thousands have been intercepted trying to make their way to countries such as Italy and Malta, which are said to be major transit points for African and Arab migrants escaping from wars and poverty in their respective countries. Edwin Ikhuoria is Africa's one executive director, and he joins us via Skype from the UK. It's great to have you. Thanks very, very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me too.
These stories always just invoke emotions that, one can never understand unless, of course, you're in a situation like this, that you feel safer putting your family into the water in the dark of night, not knowing what is going to happen to you, because you're safer there than you are in your home country. This is a situation of many, many people. Perhaps you can tell us how dire it is at the moment.
So first of all, the first instinct to survive, the first basic human instinct is, first of all, food. When people are in situations where it is so difficult to find food to eat, anything becomes an alternative. That is one. The second is safety of life. When you are in a conflict situation where you do not know whether you are able to live to see the next day, anything else is an option. And so when you have a situation in Africa, particularly where there's a lot of, over 400 million people living below the poverty line, and then with over 7 or 8 hotspots of conflict on the continent, this is inevitable that people will want to find a way to escape. The level of desperation is so terrible right now that women are going with newborns.
Yeah.
That is to tell you how desperate things are. Now, with the COVID-19 situation, it has really gotten really worse, because a lot of people were saying that, look, we would rather die of COVID-19 or die of the disease than to die of hunger. So if by any means they have an alternative, or it looks like there is a possibility of getting a better life that is different from this elsewhere, people will take it. So this is the first thing, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, Edwin, because I know that you're on a thought process, and I don't want to interrupt you, but just in terms of if we look at numbers from, I think that the numbers that we're looking at is approximately, since 2014, 20,000 people have died trying to flee Africa due to some reason, whether it be famine, war, adverse poverty, whatever it may be, trying to search for a better life. We say 20,000, yes. But do you believe that's the number, or could this even be higher?
These are the ones that have been intercepted, or the ones that have been victims, or the ones that have either drowned in the sea, or those that have been intercepted. There are many more that have been able to cross. There are many more who could not reach that point of data. So it's only the ones that were captured that have been reported. But let me give you the number here. Over 400 million people live on less than $1 a day on the continent. Striving young people, people who are struggling. They have the capacity to get themselves out of poverty, but they don't have the opportunity. Or are in conflict zones where there are some communities that overnight 100 or more than 100 people are killed, or their houses are burnt due to activities of armed bandits. So what do you think is an alternative for them? Mm-hmm. So the data is basically capturing those who are, who have been captured. But otherwise, the number is far much higher. But the number of internal migration within Africa, for instance, is not in that number, definitely. In fact, there are more internal migration within the continent than those who are trying to go to Europe.
Yeah.
And in fact, that is the reason why we need to explain again that the survival of the development of the African continent is to the benefit of the rest of the world. So nobody can ignore Africa at your own risk.
And this is really, honestly, what we're speaking about, a byproduct of this long-standing report of horrific abuses that take place in different countries. This is across the continent, as you say, wherever it may be. But, I mean, this against refugees, reportedly conducted by state officials and militias in Libya. This is what we can report on right now, because these are particularly the incidences that we're addressing of those that have drowned trying to escape from Libya. Why are Libyan authorities failing to address this?
The question is that Libya is dealing with a much larger crisis. The instability in that country, in terms of the internal conflicts, the political instability, the warring factions, is such a huge problem for them that paying attention to the issue of migrants and the activities and the issue of middlemen who are trying to exploit migrants and really give them under very terrible conditions. These people are not refugees in that sense. They are people who were captured that are trying to cross, or those who are trying to negotiate or work their way out of Libya into Europe. So that is like a cartel that is doing this, but it is distracting from the main political instability in that country. And so when you ask the Libyan authorities to focus on that, it's like your house is on fire and you are telling them to go, patch a piece of brick. So that is the reality here.
In September, the EU also revealing its new pact on refugees and asylum, which others say is more of a political rhetoric than a humanitarian approach. That's sort of the idea that many are thinking. The fact that nobody follows up on the Libyan abuses of the refugees, that's again something that is very, very worrisome. Worrisome. What do you think about something like that?
No, to be honest, you cannot expect people who are outside of Africa to really help, truly help. When I say truly help, because the level of investment that is required, the level of attention that is required, the level of logistics and real monitoring that is required to arrest the situation in Libya is much more than any country is willing to give right now. And so when they make this kind of rhetorics and they put words instead of the real action we want to see, people definitely will have doubts about how that movement is going to end up, or where that effort is going to end up. The real challenge here is to deal with the root cause of migration or illegal migration in the first place. And that is one, making sure there are no conflicts or ending every conflict that exists on the continent, as well as trying to improve or create opportunities for Africa's young people. 60% of the population are young people who are looking for a way to survive. So as long as there is that pool that is constantly supplying people who are going to try to emigrate out of the continent, you will have a continuous problem. So a long-term solution that deals with the root problem is where we really should put our effort first. Of course, the humanitarian issue of dealing with the situation in Libya right now is of critical importance, but every country is also dealing with their own internal issues, and so you don't really blame them if they give this kind of policy or this kind of statements, but there's really no backup to make sure that this situation is really taken care of.
Yeah, I'm looking at figures this is from an article back in 2016, and I can imagine that it's only gotten worse. It's a finding basically saying that every single day 2 babies, toddlers, little children drown trying to escape to a new life. Now, I remember very clearly, and I'm sure the world does as well, that photograph of that 3-year-old toddler that was found washed up on the beach. I think they were trying to get to Greece, and it was that little toddler, Aylan Kurdi. And there was so much outcry, there was so much talk about this is not right, this needs to change, things got to be done, and everybody promising and committing to something that would change. And yet, till today, we're sitting in 2020, the situation is not getting better. It appears to be getting worse. when one would say the use of diplomatic incentives, such as visa allocations, financial rewards to improve life and conditions in the countries of origin, to restrict these flows of migrants, these are some things that were put in place. But has this had an impact at all?
So again, there is a continuum, or there's a large, there's a body of data, body of issues. There are different things to consider within this conversation. Now, many countries have been involved in this. In Europe, in Africa, there have been there's partnerships between African Union and European Union. There have been different, pronouncements, commitments, projects, and, things done by the International Office of Migration. There has been humanitarian outcry, but what you see is that it is far beyond just the talk. Human lives are involved. In fact, for those that were rescued this time, it was still those, some NGOs and humanitarian rescue boats that actually got some of them out. These are piecemeal stuff. The question is, if anybody is desperate enough to take this journey, you need to really see what the conditions are in the sources, in the source country. If you don't make that investment and ensure that it actually translates to opportunities for Africa's young people, we will continue to have this problem 10 years down the line. If you block the borders to say you will continue to make it harder by increasing visa conditions, if you don't increase the opportunities for legal migration, that all of these stories will, 5 years, 10 years down the line, we are still having these conversations. And so what we've been thinking about is, how do you create a partnership between Africa and Europe, particularly as the two nearest neighboring continents, that whatever happens in Africa has a spillover into Europe? How do you create a partnership that really creates opportunities for Africa's young people? How do you create a partnership that is mutually beneficial between both continents, so that we do not, and then creates the opportunity for proper legal migration?
Yeah.
Otherwise, we will continue to have this issues, down the line, 10 years down the line.
Mm-hmm. I just want to wrap up this interview because, I've had, I can't say it a pleasure, but I have had the ability to go and visit many refugee camps on the continent and also off the continent. And when one looks at the divide, and there is a massive divide between the funding of what happens here in Africa and what happens elsewhere, perhaps in the Middle East, if we take that as an example, it really shows you where Africa falls into the priority chain. And that was glaringly obvious. And it just appears that some of these interventions that are put there are not necessarily benefiting those on the African continent, or are not meant to benefit them. And that's something that is blatantly clear. Is it something that I am making up in my mind, or is it in fact something you're feeling and seeing as well?
No, it's not what you're making up. The reality is that the resources that is available, the resources that are available for African countries to maintain refugees within their borders is so limited, with all the other issues that Africa is dealing with. And this is the reason why external help is always sought. But of course, when you look at the sheer number of people that are in these refugee camps, that are in these setups here, no African government is prepared enough to deal with those. And so this external help and partnership is critical. And so if you, again, like we talked about earlier, Africa houses more refugees than anywhere else.
Yeah.
And that requires huge investment to keep them, to give them a decent life, or talk about reintegration into the community. But that requires a lot of investment. And Africa just don't have it. We just don't have it. And that's the reality.
Edwin,
so abuse is inevitable.
Yeah, it is. Edwin, we leave it there for now. Thank you for talking to us about this. That's such a vital issue. And I hope something will keep on the radar for a very long time, because if we cannot speak about it, I suppose people don't even understand that this is happening to our fellow Africans on the continent. Edwin Ikhuoria, who is Africa One's executive director, discussing the phenomenon of African migrants who die in the Mediterranean Sea, fleeing conditions in their own countries. All right, so let's try and get one or two more tweets.